In the silent stretch of neutral space between the fractured colonies of the Outer Rim, the hospital ship Nightingale drifted like a shining promise, its pure white hull marked with golden stripes, and the universal emblem of peace, a glowing circle surrounded by open hands. For years, it had been a symbol of hope across the galaxy, where war had torn entire civilizations apart, and diplomacy had failed too many times to count. The Nightingale was not armed, nor escorted by warships, because it wasn't supposed to be a target. Protected by ancient treaties signed by over 100 species, it had one mission: to heal without asking who fired first. Inside, humans worked side by side with alien doctors, nurses, and engineers, treating soldiers, civilians, and even enemy fighters. Its halls were filled with the quiet hum of life support, soft footsteps of medical staff, and the occasional laughter of children who had escaped fire-bombed colonies. Every docking bay was busy. Injured were brought in, treated, and either returned to their fleets or moved to safe planets. Everyone, even the most hostile empires, respected the ship's neutrality. That was, until the shadows came. At 3:47 Terran Standard Time, the ship's long-range sensors caught an anomaly, a distortion in space, too regular to be natural. It lasted only seconds before a sleek black ship decloaked within striking distance. No insignia, no warnings, just a slow charge-up of high-energy weapons, glowing like crimson eyes in the void. Commander Alira Chen, the senior officer on duty, didn't panic. She ordered immediate hailing attempts, activated the ship's emergency beacons, and broadcasted the peace code on every frequency. It didn't matter. The first shot tore through the midsection, rupturing oxygen lines and sending crew into the vacuum before they could scream. The second hit the pediatric ward, silencing 32 young lives in an instant. The Nightingale's shields were minimal, designed only to protect against micrometeors and debris. It had no weapons to defend itself. Within minutes, fires raged across multiple decks. Life support began to fail. And then, with one final blast to the core, the hospital ship exploded into a blinding fireball, a storm of light that flickered out and left behind only silence and drifting debris. Of the 9,407 souls on board, only a scattered handful in escape pods survived long enough to send a message back to Earth. The footage was raw, static-filled, distorted, but impossible to misread. The peaceful ship had been ambushed and destroyed without mercy. Within hours, every screen on Earth and its colonies lit up with the same message. They fired on a hospital ship. No one knew who they were, but that didn't matter to the people watching. Across cities and spaceports, in war rooms and council chambers, the response began to form like a storm gathering over still water. The president of the Terran Coalition addressed the public in calm, clipped words, her voice sharp with contained fury. We offered peace. We gave sanctuary. They answered with fire. Earth will not stay silent. Meanwhile, in deep space, the mysterious attackers disappeared without a trace, no identification, no transmission, not even a claim of responsibility. The Galactic Council condemned the act, but offered little more than hollow words and delayed investigations. Other species whispered of rising extremist factions, but none dared name names. Still, Earth didn't wait. The Terran Defense Fleet was activated. Veterans who had retired decades ago returned to duty. Shipyards that had been silent since the last border war roared to life. Across military channels, 3 words repeated like a thunderclap: assemble the fleet. From the icy stations of Europa to the desert bases of Mars, humanity prepared not just for war, but for something deeper, a reckoning. The destruction of the Nightingale wasn't just the loss of a ship. It was the murder of mercy itself. It was a betrayal so deep, so cold, that it pulled something primal from the heart of every human watching. They remembered the lives that ship had saved, They remembered the oath it stood for, and they remembered the innocent faces who had trusted it to be safe. Across the stars, allies sent condolences. Enemies watched in silence. And somewhere, hidden in the dark, the attackers waited, unaware that they had awakened a one force in the galaxy that never forgot, never forgave, and never backed down when the innocent bled. The Nightingale had been a beacon of mercy. What would follow now would be a fleet of fury. The news of the Nightingale's destruction spread through the Terran systems like a firestorm, each second building pressure in a population that had once promised never to raise a full fleet again. Earth had seen war before long, bitter ones that left scars on planets and minds, but this was different. This time, the pain was quiet and cold, born not from strategy or border disputes, but from the deliberate slaughter of the defenseless. It wasn't just humans who mourned. Across allied worlds, even non-human species who had sent their wounded to the Nightingale lowered their flags and darkened their networks in respect. On Earth, the sky above New Geneva turned black as every global feed replayed the last known images from the ship: a mother cradling her injured child, a nurse treating a Kraxith soldier with care, lights flickering before the screen cut to white flame and silence. In that silence, Earth changed. The Council of Unified Defense, usually slow and political, acted without delay. Every military channel crackled to life, summoning commanders from all quadrants. The Terran fleet, long dormant in peaceful orbit, began to stir. On the orbital platform, Aegis 1, Admiral Rissa Deneuve stood alone in the observation deck, her face hard as stone, watching Earth spin below. She had commanded fleets in the Orion blockade, held the line in the Battle of Red Sun, and retired thinking her wars were done. But the Nightingale had once been her mission, a symbol of the peace she fought to protect, and its death dragged her back to the bridge. Across the Sol system, messages were sent to every reserve unit, colony defense corps, and retired veteran. Within hours, Mars launched its first cruiser in 10 years, while shipyards over Titan lit up with construction protocols that had been sealed since the last great conflict. Civilian engineers offered their skills freely. Parents sent their adult children with solemn pride, and cargo haulers were converted into mobile supply stations. AI battle mines, stored in deep quantum vaults, were awakened one by one, not cold, emotionless machines, but bonded partners of humanity, remembering the names of their old crews and asking quietly if Earth was at war again. When the answer came, they did not hesitate. For the healers, the message read, and that was enough. The fleet did not assemble in silence, it sang. Engines roared across the black sky, carriers floated like islands of steel and fire, and long-range scouts vanished into deep space on missions cloaked in shadow. The flagship Retribution, newly completed and never before tested, was named not in anger, but in promise. It carried no decorative lines, no banners, just a single etched phrase above the hangar doors: not forgotten. At the same time, the enemy remained faceless. No group claimed the attack. No one accepted responsibility. The Galactic Council issued a half-hearted call for caution and suggested diplomatic patience, but Earth knew better. Somewhere, behind hidden signals and stolen tech, the hand that fired on the hospital ship still moved silent, calculating, and dangerous. Intelligence reports began to point toward whispers of the Varkaol Covenant, a radical breakaway faction of the Kraxith Dominion. The Varkaol had long despised human influence, calling Earth a disease of compassion that weakened the balance of power in the galaxy. But even they had never dared attack a peace vessel. Until now. As evidence mounted, Rissa Deneuve addressed the assembled fleet from the bridge of the Retribution, her voice calm but sharp. She did not speak in fury, nor with threats, but with quiet fire that lit every heart across the transmission. She spoke of the nurses who stayed behind to help others escape, of the alien volunteers who died beside their human crewmates, of the children whose lives were stolen before they even knew the meaning of war. She spoke not for revenge, but for justice. "We are not moving in anger," she said. "We are answering a crime. Not just against Earth, but against every species that values life. And we will answer as one." From that moment, the Terran fleet was no longer just a military force. It became a symbol. Across allied worlds, ships volunteered to join. Some old enemies offered silent nods of respect. Neutral planets sent resources without being asked. The attack on the Nightingale had been meant to scare or provoke, but it had instead united humanity like never before. And though Earth would and as the last of the fleet formations locked into place and the final coordinates were plotted into the jump drives, the stars themselves seemed to shift in anticipation. The fleet was ready. Earth had spoken. And the galaxy would soon understand what happened when someone tried to kill Mercy and walk away unpunished. Kalo Reach had once been a quiet system, filled with drifting trade stations, resource-rich asteroid belts, and a small population of colonists spread across its 3 habitable moons. But now it was a battlefield waiting to ignite. Intelligence from Terran scouts confirmed what Command had feared: a major Varkaal fleet had gathered near Kylo's 4th moon, using the system as a hidden supply base and forward staging point. The region was never meant for war, but the enemy had chosen it as the perfect place to launch future attacks, confident that Earth would move too slowly to respond. They were wrong. The Terran fleet arrived not in anger, but in terrifying silence, slipping out of subspace like shadows made of fire and steel. The Retribution led the charge, flanked by heavy cruisers and swift corvettes that spread like a net across the system's edges, cutting off every escape path the Varkaal might use. From a distance, it looked like a gathering storm, massive ships with glowing drives forming a wall of justice, creeping closer to the unaware enemy fleet. Admiral Risa Denev stood at the center of the Retribution's war deck, her eyes locked on the swirling tactical displays as the AI companion Vox calculated enemy positions with brutal precision. The Varkaal had numbers, yes, but no coordination. Their fleet was strong, but scattered, made up of older ships, stolen tech, and overconfident raiders. They did not expect Earth to strike first. They certainly didn't expect Earth to strike with such speed. At 700 Terran standard, the first volley was launched, not from the flagship, but from the stealth drones seeded through the asteroid belt hours earlier. The Varkaal outer sentries never saw them coming. One by one, enemy patrol ships vanished in quiet bursts of light. No alerts were raised, no warnings sent. By the time the main Varkaal force realized what was happening, the Terran fleet was already inside weapons range. The Retribution's main cannons fired first, carving through the largest enemy destroyer like paper, followed by a precision strike from the Starhammer, which detonated the Varkaal command ship in a single calculated blow. Confusion spread among the enemy ranks. Orders were lost. Signals jammed. The Varkaal captains shouted over each other, unaware that Terran cyber warfare units had already hijacked their communication grid. From the chaos, Terran strike teams launched boarding torpedoes into enemy vessels, forcing surrender before ships could even return fire. In 12 minutes, the battle turned from ambush to massacre. But Earth did not fight with hatred. Human pilots targeted engines, not life support. Fire teams pulled wounded Varkaal soldiers from burning corridors. Terran medics followed behind assault units, treating enemies with the same respect given to allies. This was war, but not slaughter, and the galaxy would see the difference. The battle raged for another hour, as pockets of Varkaal resistance tried to regroup. They launched a desperate counterattack, sending their fastest ships in a high-speed flanking maneuver through Kalo's dense asteroid field, hoping to catch the Terran rearguard by surprise. But Earth had learned from centuries of space warfare. Admiral Deneuve had already predicted the move. Hidden among the asteroids were Terran stealth frigates, silent and cold, waiting like wolves in the dark. As the Varkol flanking force entered the rocks, they were met with blinding light and silent missiles, one after another. None made it through. With their final push crushed, the remaining Varkol vessels tried to scatter, fleeing in all directions. But there was nowhere left to run. The Terran fleet surrounded the system completely, locking down every route. One by one, enemy ships were forced to power down, their crews surrendering to boarding parties without a fight. By the end of the third hour, the Kayla Reach was silent again, not with peace, but with the heavy quiet that follows justice. The stars burned softly overhead as rescue vessels moved in to retrieve survivors, both human and Varkayal. The space around Kayla's fourth moon was now filled with Terran medical ships, restoring order, cleaning debris, and collecting evidence of the Varkalal's plans. The most critical data recovered from enemy systems pointed toward a far larger operation. Kaylor had not been the goal, only the beginning. Files suggested that the Varkol Covenant had resources spread across several systems, sleeper fleets waiting in hiding, and even infiltration plans for allied worlds. But before Earth could act on those leads, it had to send a message. That message came not in fire, but in light. As the retribution rose over the system's edge, every surviving Terran ship activated its beacon. Thousands of lights formed across the black, spelling a simple signal broadcasted in every known language: "Your war is with us now." The image was captured by deep space observers and spread across the networks within hours. Civilizations paused. Allies wept in quiet respect. Even enemies watched in silence, understanding that a storm had begun, not born of vengeance, but of the unshakable human belief that those who harm the innocent must answer. Kayla Reach had burned, but Earth had not burned it in rage. It had burned it clean, like fire, through a poisoned wound. And this was only the beginning. The Terran fleet turned toward its next target, not for conquest, but to find the hand that had dared attack mercy itself. In every heart aboard those ships, one thought remained steady. They were not done, not yet. The Orc Nexus was never built for war. It was a neutral hub, a colossal artificial ring station floating between the stars like a shining crown, where diplomats met, merchants traded, and travelers from 100 species passed through in peace. For decades, it had been considered untouchable, protected by old treaties and a network of powerful defense satellites to discourage conflict. But now, behind its glittering facade and the slow dance of its traffic lanes, something darker was growing. After the flames of Kaylor Reach, the Terran fleet uncovered data pointing to the heart of the Varkol Covenant's operations, buried deep in the lower decks of Orc Nexus, masked by civilian activity and protected by bribes, forged identities, and false alliances. What shocked Earth the most was not the location, but the fact that many within the station's leadership had known not all, but enough to look the other way, while war was being planned beneath their feet. Admiral Rissa Deneuve stood once again on the bridge of the Retribution, the stars of the Nexus system stretching beyond the viewport, her jaw tight as the fleet approached in full formation. This was no longer just a strike, it was a siege, and it would be executed, not with rage, but with precision. Earth had given the station a choice: surrender those responsible, open your records, let us in. But the reply had been a careful denial, claiming ignorance and insisting on more time. Time Earth could no longer give. The Varkol were using the station not only as a base, but as a shield, hiding behind the laws of peace while plotting more terror in the shadows. The council debated. The diplomats hesitated. But the people who had seen the Nightingale burn did not forget. So the order was given. The fleet surrounded the Nexus like a tightening ring of fate ships, stationed at every entry vector. Communication relays locked, jump gates sealed, and a message broadcast on all channels. No vessel leaves. No one fires. Cooperate, and no blood will be spilled. For a moment, the stars held their breath. Inside the Nexus, panic began to spread. Thousands of civilians had no idea what was coming, and officials scrambled to maintain order as Terran special units, armed not just with weapons, but with warrants and evidence, prepared to board. The Varkaal agents, realizing their time was short, tried to vanish into the station's maze like lower sectors, but Earth had come prepared. AI intelligence units flooded the Nexus systems, tracking every encrypted signal, every hidden transport code, and every falsified ID. One by one, safe houses were exposed, weapons caches uncovered, and names dragged into the light. The first real shots were fired not in the sky, but deep in the underlevels, where Varkaal loyalists, trapped and desperate, opened fire on Terran recon teams. The battle was close, brutal, and fast corridor by corridor, hatch by hatch. The Terrans moved with discipline and speed, neutralizing threats while protecting innocent bystanders. Drones flew ahead, mapping heat signatures and motion trails, while armored units followed close behind, clearing nests of resistance, like surgeons cutting infection from the body. Above in orbit, the fleet watched with steady eyes, ready to strike if the situation turned. The station's defense satellites remained cold, their controllers unwilling to risk a full assault against Earth's warships, knowing what would follow. And then, in the heart of the Nexus, they found it the command room of the Varkaal network, hidden behind false walls and shielded codes, guarded by elite warriors who had sworn to die rather than be taken. The final confrontation was fierce. Explosions rocked the chamber, smoke filled the narrow halls, and the screams of battle echoed through steel corridors. But the Terrans did not fall. Their armor held. Their formation never broke. And, when it was over, the last Varkaal commander was dragged from the fire, bloodied but alive, carrying with him data cores that confirmed the full scope of the Covenant's plan. Coordinated strikes across 6 systems, sleeper cells in major colonies, and most disturbing of all, a secret alliance with rogue factions in supposedly neutral governments. With this evidence in hand, Earth didn't gloat. It didn't threaten. It released the files to the galaxy, unedited, uncensored, undeniable. The reaction was immediate. Allies who had doubted Earth's actions fell silent, now understanding the scale of betrayal. Even the Galactic Council, so long cautious and slow, was forced to act, issuing arrest orders for corrupt leaders and backing Terran authority across multiple sectors. The Nexus, once a symbol of peace, now stood as a symbol of consequence. Earth didn't destroy it. Earth didn't seize it. But Earth changed it forever. The civilians were protected, the station repaired, and new security protocols installed this time, built by Earth and her allies together. As the fleet pulled away from the Nexus, leaving behind a world forever altered, Admiral Deneuve allowed herself a moment of silence. The mission was not finished. The Varkaal Covenant still had ships, still had plans, and above all, still had the blood of the Nightingale on their hands. But the walls were closing in now. One by one, their hiding places were crumbling. And across every Terran vessel, from the smallest drone to the mightiest cruiser, one truth burned like fire in the core. Mercy had been attacked, and justice was coming steady, unshaken, and unstoppable. The final hour came not with thunder, but with a deep silence, the kind that settles before a storm changes everything. Across the stars, news spread like a tidal wave. The Varkaal Covenant had fallen back to their last stronghold, an ancient war station hidden within the dying system of Drosk 7, surrounded by collapsing stars and poisoned space, a place no sane fleet would enter willingly. But Earth was not seeking safety, Earth was seeking justice. After Orc Nexus, no one questioned Terran resolve. Their message was clear, not just in words, but in the calm, determined way they moved. This was not conquest. This was reckoning. As the fleet gathered once more larger than before, now joined by allies who had once doubted, and now stood shoulder to shoulder, there was no celebration, only a quiet understanding. This mission would end it all. The Retribution led the Armada through the torn gravity waves of Drosk 7, her hull burning with deflection shields, as the system's dying suns screamed around them. Inside, Admiral Rissa Denev stood without armor or medals, wearing the simple uniform of a soldier who had carried too many names of the dead. Her orders were final. There would be no negotiations, no more delays. The Varkoal leadership, responsible for the hospital ship's destruction, had refused every chance to surrender. They would face judgment, not in chains, but in the flames they had lit. As Earth ships entered range, the enemy opened fire with everything they had: orbital batteries, drone swarms, plasma lances tearing through the void like knives. The sky cracked with light, and the battle began. But this time, Earth was not caught off guard. This time, Earth came with every lesson learned across centuries. Swarms of Terran drones darted between enemy defenses, disabling key systems before they could even lock on targets. Cyber units flooded Varkoal networks, turning their own weapons against them. Allied cruisers blocked escape vectors, cutting off the last routes of retreat. And in the heart of the chaos, strike teams punched through enemy hulls, not to destroy but to capture. Each leader found was brought out alive, forced to face the truth they had denied: the images of the Nightingale, the recordings from Kylor, the cries of the wounded from Orc Nexus. There was no escape now. As the last Varkoal dreadnought fell, crippled and powerless, the system grew quiet again. The fighting ended, but the reckoning had only begun. Trials were held not on Earth, but in space, aboard a neutral station, rebuilt near the ruins of Kylor, watched live by 1,000 species across the galaxy. Evidence spoke louder than fire. Survivors gave testimony. Even some Varkoal soldiers, sickened by what they had been ordered to do, told the truth. In the end, those who had ordered the attack on the Nightingale, who had planned to cloak war behind fake treaties and civilian lives, were sentenced not to death, but to exile beyond the Rim, a punishment harsher than execution in the eyes of their people. They would live, but never return, their names stripped from history by their own kind. Earth did not celebrate. Instead, they remembered. A new monument was built at the site where the Nightingale once floated, a simple statue, showing a Terran medic holding the hand of an alien child, with a plaque beneath it that read, "Mercy is not weakness, but those who strike mercy shall face strength." This became Earth's new legacy, not as conquerors, but as protectors. In the months that followed, human-led peace fleets patrolled the outer systems, not to enforce dominance, but to ensure safety. Medical ships, designed after the Nightingale, were rebuilt with stronger shields, smarter AIs, and guarded convoys because Mercy would still fly, but never alone again. Admiral Denev retired quietly, returning to a quiet moon near Saturn, but her name remained written in every treaty that followed. Young captains carried her lessons, and Terran children learned the story not as a tale of war, but as a lesson in unity, that when kindness is attacked, justice will rise, and humanity will not stand down. The galaxy, once fragmented and slow to act, now looked to Earth not with fear, but with trust. And though the scars of the war would never fully fade, they were no longer wounds, they were reminders, carved into the stars, of a moment when the universe saw what it meant to challenge mercy. The reckoning had come, not with hatred, but with honor. And the legacy it left behind was not just fire or steel, but hope strong, shining, and unbreakable.